Welcome to Conversations with Agents of Change, the podcast where we meet people who are challenging established ways of thinking, strengthening communities, and turning ideas into meaningful action. I'm your host, Izy Boyd. Today, we are exploring a form of change that does not always receive the recognition it deserves. It is not necessarily loud. It doesn't always begin with a major campaign, a new technology, or a national policy announcement. Sometimes change begins with a room where people feel welcome. It begins with someone helping a small community group complete a funding application, supporting a volunteer who has stepped into a leadership role, listening to a young person who does not feel heard, or connecting organizations that could achieve more together than they ever could alone. My guest today is Louise Spence, manager of North Down Community Network. Louise has worked with the organization since 2012. She leads its team, oversees its operations, and helps shape how it supports community groups, develops partnerships, and responds to the needs of people across Bangor and North Down. North Down Community Network exists to strengthen the local community and voluntary sector. Its work includes community development, governance and funding support, skills training, health and well-being programs, youth development, advocacy, and collaboration. So, Louise, welcome to Conversations with Agents of Change.
Thank you very much, Izzy. That's a very warm welcome. Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here. So, before we talk about the organization, I would like to begin with you. You've been part of the North Down Community Network since 2012. And what first brought you into the community development and what has kept you committed to this work for so many years?
I've been involved in community development now for about 25 years. And up until 2012, all of my contracts, like so many people within the sector, were all short term. So
Yeah.
18 months, 2 years. So I experienced kind of quite a lot of change in my early part of my career, which on the one hand was quite challenging because you're always having to go in to sort of establish new relationships. But on the other hand, it was also really, it built a lot of skills in me because then you had to learn on a fairly regular basis what it was to walk into a room and not know anyone and trying to develop relationships. So my work up until 2012 was all kind of moving different parts of Northern Ireland and even down in the Republic, down in Finglas, doing some international work and stuff as well. So I sort of came to Bangor because I thought, right, well, one contract in another place has come to an end. And Bangor, I grew up kind of coming down to the caravan to Groomsport and all. So I just thought, right, okay, well, see how this goes for the next wee while and just try it out. I originally started as the outreach worker, and I think my post originally was maybe 6 or 7 months, just in the typical fashion of kind of rolling annual contracts. So I thought, look, I'll try it here to see what I think, and really quickly discovered the degree of need, the potential, which really made me very excited. So I moved from being the outreach worker to the manager. The manager became unwell, and then I stepped up and then ended up being recruited for the post. So I don't feel like it's been 14 years, and I think that's a really good sign because it's so changeable and so dynamic, and there's been so many changes and adaptations. So, and I feel very much about Bangor that it's a small pond. So it feels to me like you really can make a change because it's not so vast as somewhere like Belfast.
Yeah.
Really good work happening up there. But I think for me, what I identified really early on here, because I'd moved about so many different parts of Belfast and Northern Ireland, was how behind so many groups here were, not because they didn't have the need, but there hadn't been the investment. So I was really passionate early on about people having higher expectations and getting a fairer part of the pie when it came to resources and support.
Absolutely. And I think community work sometimes can feel very challenging. And it's usually described by the programs that they developed and the outputs and the services. But behind all that is the relationships. And people have to trust the organization enough to walk through the door and ask for help and share the idea. And I think all your team have achieved that very much. So the people who are still engaged feel that it's a safe space. So that trust cannot be created through the strategy just in a document. It has to be built through the consistency and the people who keep showing up. So I really find that fascinating. And tell me something. Do you recognize yourself as a leader, or have you always feel like you work
And
alongside with others?
I always loved being in the trenches with people. I need to be able to pick up any aspect of our work at any given stage. So I would be really heavily involved in our operations in terms of delivery so that if a staff member became unwell or was off, things can continue. They won't be exactly the same, but I always need to be able to kind of pick something up in terms of also being able to support staff. I don't think you can really lead people or guide them well or be supportive to them if you don't really understand what their job is and the pressures that they're under. And we're blessed, like our team they're so sincerely people, so good at relationships, so good at transparency, so good at really genuinely caring, but entirely professional in terms of boundaries and where our work begins and ends. Highly motivated, and they really are a fantastic asset. So I couldn't agree more with you that our team does a really brilliant job. Like everyone works really hard to cultivate the relationships amongst our team and also with the people that we engage with. So we have really long standing relationships with whether that's our young people who kind of come through the ranks with us or whether that's through the people who go to our wellbeing programs or our community cafe. These are people that we know intimately in terms of the needs and the issues that they would bring to us. And that only can come, as you say, whenever people feel like they're really heard by you and they really can trust you. So I think of myself, I suppose, as being someone in the trenches with everyone else. And there's happy to take a lead whenever it's required, and often it is required. But for me, I'm as happy to make a cup of tea and let other people talk if they want to. But I'll always, especially whenever the going gets tough, I'll always be keen to make sure that my shoulders do the wheel as well with everyone else.
And that's so powerful because I think most influential leaders do not feel themselves as they need to be upfront and they have to be leading. They just know that by making the group or creating those conditions to let people to contribute and grow and they can take ownership. They are leading, but they are in the kind of in the back, which I think is fantastic. Northdown Community Network describes its purpose as helping people to help themselves. That sounds very simple, but it represents quite a powerful philosophy. So, what does helping people help themselves mean to you in practice?
I suppose I would think of our role in the early days of trying to support someone because often when someone comes to our door or makes a phone call or sends us an email, it's normally because they're reaching out for something. So they're often reaching out because something has gone wrong in their life and they're just trying to find support with that or a bit of guidance or signposting, or indeed they've decided that today's going to be the day that they're going to get up and get involved in something that's going to be part of building their life or edifying them in some way. So we sort of in the early days very much kind of describe our work as if you're nearly the scaffolding around a person. And the point of being around them like that is just so that they can kind of find their legs, so they can find their feet and realize and build a bit of strength, do a little bit more at a time with support to the point where what we want to be able to do is to say, look, now you are standing on your own. And you see the benefits of that and the fruits of that whenever people maybe start with us in a small way in a 4-week program around mental health. And then they come on to a further mental health program. And then they come to our sing along spin class and give it a try, even though they've social anxiety and they don't normally leave the house and they're really nervous about that. And the first day they don't talk to anyone and they only speak to our staff. And then the second week they kind of don't come because they're still too nervous. And the third week they finally come back and make a friend. And we've got people who would be on a journey like that with us, Izzy, for a year. But by the end of that year, they are now members of the gym, going multiple times a week, holidaying with their new friends that they've found, engaging in a whole range of our different programs and activities, and vitally, are doing things with other organizations in other places. So for us, it's always about trying to guide people to understand and really believe in their potential, to be the supportive mechanism that we can be to help them sort of just strengthen their legs enough that they realize that they can keep moving in that direction. And sometimes people take a seat and fall back. And you have to be there again to sort of say, right, okay, let's go again on this. It's very much about that sort of journey along with people, but at the core of it is very much about believing in the potential of people, even if they can't yet see it in themselves.
And that's so powerful because I think that when you work with them rather than for them, it just makes such a big difference because there's a huge temptation, especially when someone is facing like a specific difficulty, like as you mentioned, anxiety. We would want to step in and help out and solve the problem as quick as possible. But the fact that you are taking it slow and say like, no, you're going to solve it by building those skills yourself. And sometimes intervention is necessary, but the way it's done in this case, it's in a very different way. It's like giving that space and that time and that comfort. So I find that very, very powerful. I think that it's so needed for, as you said, so many people who are living that situation. And that's the difference between resolving one problem and increasing someone else's capacity to face the next one, which I really find that very, very powerful.
And don't get me wrong, that's been learnt painfully.
Yeah.
I think we're all tempted when you have someone who comes through the door and they can present you with a personal journey that's so harrowing and you can see their potential and you think, right, this conversation will be the change. I will be the one who will help guide them through that journey of change. And sometimes with some people, you recognize that they will move around individuals within an organization or indeed around organizations and they will share the same story. They can actually get really caught in that being the definition of who they are. So that journey that we have been on has required a lot of reflection. We haven't just arrived there. It's came through at times thinking, no, this person, for whatever reason, is still on the same story, still going through the same narrative, still not taking the scaffold and support and trying to stand. And there's a point too with people like that for very good reason, based on their trauma and their journey, that you have to say, look, we're here to support you, but we can't facilitate you just continuing to sit.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lovely theory, but it's came about as a result of a lot of reflection and a lot of learning across our team.
Which is very interesting because when you think about finding that balance between providing like immediate practical help and encouraging, so it's that balance. And as you said, it has come from a lot of experience. So that must require a lot of patience as well because empowerment is not always the fastest route. So, Northdown Community Network supports local groups in very practical ways, including governance, funding, applications, charity registration, financial procedures, access and ICE checks. So, it sounds like a lot of different help from dozens of members of organizations and small volunteer-led groups and all that. So it's a lot of work what is happening behind the scenes. So people might see just a successful youth club or a well-being program or a community event, but they are not seeing all the admin that goes behind that, the governance, the funding, that's the safeguarding, all the work that made it all possible. How important is that less visible infrastructure that's in the back?
It's the essence of why we were created. We were created in 1999, and at that time, the government, there was quite a bit of investment across the country where there was a recognition that community and charitable organisations, voluntary groups need support with infrastructure because running charities is not a straightforward process if you want to have the right sort of conditions and things in place. And so that's why we were originally created, along with a number of other rural or urban networks that we work with, even to this day. So for us, it's even more pertinent because running a charity now is a much more complex thing. We now have charity legislation. We now have the Charity Commission. We're one of their helper groups. We sit on their stakeholder forum and work alongside them as well, trying to kind of guide organisations through what it is to become registered, what that process looks like. I always say, I've never yet met a community volunteer who wanted to get good at forms. You know, I only ever meet people who are either so sad or so mad about something that they're motivated to do something about it. And
Yes.
as a tag along 25 years ago, you had to do the odd application form that was probably quite straightforward and then spend your money and send in your receipts. We're in a different world altogether now with regards to processes of quotes and procurement and the charity commission, the governance stuff and the safeguard and all those layers of it. So becoming a volunteer in a charity, and that's our particular emphasis would be for those charitable groups that are run by volunteers. I'm paid to do what I do, but we have an even further dedicated layer of people who do what they do for their communities and for their charities as volunteers. So we're very conscious of trying to support them and take some of the pain out of those volunteering roles because they wanted to get into the nitty gritty. They wanted to get into creating the women's program or doing the men's shed or running their tea dances or whatever it was that motivated them to develop their community. They didn't want to get really good at Excel forms and understanding how to do charity returns. So our job is to get alongside them to help make sure that they comply, but in a way that doesn't just completely put them off running a charity. And that's proven to be more and more challenging. We definitely experienced a real fall away of volunteers as a result of COVID too. I think a lot of people set their volunteering role down And then life took over, circumstances and caregiving responsibilities and family took over. And it's very hard for them to pick it back up again. So we would feel really strongly about the importance of trying to make that background essential building sort of blocks, help them put them in place as easily as possible, because even when you get those in place, existing and surviving and even, dare say it, thriving in this sector is becoming more and more challenging. But the demands on the work are greater.
Absolutely. When you reflect about that, the change usually has an architecture behind it. And sometimes it's the huge force of the volunteers. And yes, of course, there's the fundings and there's a lot of different layers, but without the volunteers and the people in need, it would be very difficult to get there. So many community groups are led by volunteers who are very passionate about the cause, but they might suddenly find themselves dealing with the regulation, the finances, and significant responsibility. What are the most common challenges those volunteers bring to you?
It's interesting because often funders or government departments, first of all, getting the money is tough. And that's a big role in terms of what we would have and how we would support them to kind of do funding applications. And even in terms of quotes for that, you have some statutory organisations. It's quite a complex process of quotes. It's not if it's your job. If you're paid to sit at a computer and find quotes, it's not a big deal to do that. But if you're trying to run a business or take care of a family or have current responsibilities or are retired or ill, it's a very different thing. So one, getting the money is one level of the challenge. And then when the money comes, the way in which it needs to be spent is also a challenge as well. Now, all of these groups that we work with are always very grateful for support because it is hard to come by. But there's some funders that really understand the sector, like the likes of the National Lottery, really understand the sector, work in a very flexible way, make everything very supportive, are very much enablers for the people that they fund. And they're a dream to work with because they really understand the sector and the needs of people who are trying to deliver good things for people in need. And then you'll have other funders that I won't name that just, particularly on a statutory end of things, who are just form mad, just systems driven, and have no sense that these systems are being used by people. So the delivery of particular activities there can be a great challenge. And then one of the challenges we also experience is that some funding departments from the likes of council and things can also be so generic and so accessible that it becomes exclusive. And what I mean by that is they have funding applications that I could apply for as Northland Community Network for a couple of £1,000, which would be handy for me, but not essential for our survival. In the same pot, we can have groups that are applying that it will be the survival of their organisation for that grant. So the criteria is so wide that it means that anybody can go into that pot, as opposed to realising that there really should be distinct differences for volunteer-led groups, that there should be distinct differences for groups that have assets. Because it's like we're all going to the same trough to eat, but some people going to that trough are very, very strong. And when you're very, very strong, you can just shove other people out of the way. So that competition means that the sector, for me, it moves away from the ethos of what it's supposed to be. I have enough, so let me make sure that you also receive, as opposed to thinking, well, we can all take that £2,000. And then what also happens to it becomes so competitive and so many people are applying for that amount of money, then those who really need it get less and less because the pot is stretched further. So all of those dynamics are the ways in which we would really focus in on our advocacy work to say it's never about saying that another area or another group shouldn't be invested in, but it is about looking at an organisation and saying, well, what are their current assets? What are their current needs? What other funding are they currently securing? Do they really need this? As opposed to the criteria is wide and I can apply, so I'm going to go for it. And it's straightforward. Because again, if you're a full-time staff member, you have time to sit doing a funding application. If you're a community volunteer, that's not a gift that you have. It's a luxury to have time to do that. So for us, it's always about trying to really create equity in the sector so that everyone can thrive, as opposed to some groups that we would support being so weary by systems and processes and advocacy that they can just about survive. So thriving and having higher expectation feels like a bit of a dream at times to them.
That's so powerful. And I think it's so relevant because you're very right when you say that when you don't have the time or you don't have the skills or something is lacking, you might feel, oh, well, I can't. Whereas if there's someone else who might help you to cover certain things or maybe facilitate the use of a IT suite or whatever it is. It is very powerful. And I also want to bring the conversation a little bit into the isolation and the poverty, the fear, and those needs that you would have before you can actually be strong enough to go to a community center or look for help. And you can see that all through statistics, and there's a lot of research. But how does North Down Community Network listen to the community and identify what people genuinely need rather than assuming that it already knows?
We ask them, we'll do small focus group conversations with the people who would engage in our health and wellbeing programs. We do an individual survey with each of them in terms of understanding what their health and wellbeing needs are. Then in the community context, we would do quite a lot. Relationships are key to us, really, in terms of anybody that we would support or partner with. So we would spend a lot of time really developing relationships with people so that they can have very open, frank conversations about what their needs are, and how they're going to even engage with their groups and their organizations and their wider communities. And then that mantra stays with us even in terms of our young people. So there's nothing that we'll do on any of our youth programs that we won't check in with the young people and say, do you want this? Or what do you want? And even at times whenever I find myself kind of coming up with what I think is a brilliant idea, again, I have a board and a staff team that are very good about saying, well, did we ask them? Do we ask these young people if they want to go to Queen's and the University of Ulster, or do we just think it's a good thing? Well, no, we asked them, would they like to? And they said, yes, we would. So, right now, we'll give them the option. So, for us, it's always about the relationship stuff and always about really working hard to listen to people and then to turn what they say into something we can do. And if it's not, then explaining to them why that's just not within our gift. That's not something that we can do. But asking people and really listening to them and really being on the same page with them. Again, in the trenches, it's that sense of just feeling you can feel their battle and they need to feel when they turn around that North Down Community Network are beside them, whatever it is they're facing. So whether they're trying to get a memorial created in their local community and they've been campaigning for 8 years, or whether they're trying to get finally a pitch in their local community at the correct dimensions, or they're challenging a government minister on a care package for someone that just didn't work out in their community, whatever it is, it's about us making sure that when they turn around, they have a real sense that we're by their side and supporting them because we really have heard, listen, and understand what they need.
Absolutely. And I think that part, that listening is very important because members within the community, they are not all the same. They have different experiences and different needs and different fears. But when you listen and you pay attention to that, you can feed into that sense of belonging. And I think it's very, very important because that will drive a solution that it just works beautifully. It's not just one place that it transfers directly, but it's just we all work together to find what we want to do for the community, which I find is very strong. Can you remember a moment when listening to the community caused the organization to change its approach or that created something different from what they had originally been planned? So
We were a small administration building in a car park in Bangor beside the college. It's a very unassuming, basically, it's a porta cabin with bricks around it. It's supposed to be demolished probably, I don't know, 5 years ago, but it's in good enough nick. So we've always had this as our main administration building. But when I first came down into Bangor, I was really conscious that it wasn't a thoroughfare, that you didn't have people just falling upon this as a place for community development. So I was like, let's go down in the town centre, and we piloted one unit down in the flagship when it was still opened. And that's when you still had Dunn stores in Iceland, and there was quite a bit of a footfall. So that snowballed for us. We basically went from one unit to three, plus a community cafe once a week in the shared space. The shopping centre was becoming more and more derelict. So obviously, us being there was just creating another presence to it. We ended up getting a shop front on Main Street, our community hub, which we had for a few years just before COVID. And then just after COVID, we also got a bigger extended site just beside it, which became a wellbeing centre. That came from Department of Health funding. And we were coming out of COVID, we were able to provide a really fantastic space for people to come to, who could drop in, find out about our courses and programs. We were inundated with referrals from social workers and GPs, and we had a podcast recording studio, we had a sewing class running, we had a whole range of different activities, all very, very good. what happened then was, one, the funding was coming to an end, but two, we were getting feedback from our member groups that were saying, that's really wonderful. But where's the community delivery out in the context of community for us? Like, we can come and participate in this, but that's not the same as delivery in and for our communities. At the same thing, what we also started discovering too was that the drop-in element of it also meant that there was some people that came with the intention to participate in yoga, for example, and then got chatting to you and I, Lizzie, and basically had a cup of coffee and a packet of biscuits rather than going to yoga.
Yeah. Okay.
We're like, no, guys, the whole point of this is about promoting well-being. So we had to make some changes in terms of, you can't just come and drop in and sit all day, which some people were. You have to participate in something, which some people were up in arms about, but understood the essence of it. But then when it became clear that the funding was coming to an end, you're reaching a point where you had to listen to those member groups again to say, well, actually, they're saying quite strongly that that's great. That's been very good for a cohort of people. But coming out of COVID, we also need some delivery in the context of our community. So all of those things worked providentially at the same time. There was the end of a certain chapter and the beginning of a new chapter. So for us, we pivoted then. Our team, of course, just responded and did what was needed. And we still run all those wellbeing and health programs, some still town centre, but quite a portion of them out in the context of communities across the areas of need that we would support. So that was a good example of a model that worked very well for its time, but then being in a position to say, we have to take it back to the ethos of what we're about, an infrastructure organisation, supporting groups on the ground to support their communities and serve their communities better. So how do we pivot again to make sure that we're adhering to that central ethos? So that's probably the best example I could give you.
I love that because it's
Learning.
just a great example of responsive leadership when you think about it, because it just takes a bit of humility to change the direction and say, okay, the concept is all right, but the delivery, what we have to change. So we have to go to them. And I think that it's probably, when you see your statistics, you can see the amount of the people who are participating rather than people who used to go there. So I love that because it just shows you how a small tweak can make a very important impact.
And again, too, it's the challenge. I'm not going to lie. Also, to go from a small footprint in town centre to quite a sizable footprint in town centre, and we were involved in Christmas events and Easter things and whole range of different things. And what you realise was there was a lot. I think we gave a lot to the social workers and the trust, and a lot of people were kind of referring people to us, and sometimes just dropping people off and saying, like, you're sort of going, no, this is not a daycare. Some people were coming in with quite severe dementia or their own challenges. So there was also a whole journey in coming to terms with giving up a large footprint like that. I sort of compared it to like someone giving you like your dream house, and you're in it and you think, look at me in my dream house, this is wonderful, and it's big and it's substantial, and then you suddenly realize, I can only afford to eat beans and toast. This is not sustainable. And I have to have as you say, the wisdom and the humility to kind of go, okay, this was nice, but when the funding isn't there, this is not sustainable and it's not wise to use resources in this direction. So you do have to say, we need to downsize and we need to make sure that we're continuing to prioritize the groups and the communities that we serve,
Yeah.
as opposed to thinking we need to hold on tight to this footprint. And there's a huge gap in it. We still have people that say, like, I remember those days and I loved being able to call in, and you're like, that's brilliant. But now you can call in at the community cafe on a Tuesday or at the Bloomfield Community House when they have their open day. And so it's just about the redirection of people. But you'll always get people who just would, please just go and open another wellbeing centre and let us all just come and sit and have cups of tea. And you're like,
Yeah, don't we all like that? Just to have somewhere to go and just hang with like-minded people. So part of the NDCN mission is to represent community and voluntary organizations and advocate particularly for people whose voices might be underrepresented or overlooked. Who is currently at greatest risk of not being heard in or down?
I suppose I can't ever look past the groups that we serve. So I suppose just to set a bit of context. So obviously anybody in Northern Ireland understands the multiple deprivation statistics. So whenever government investment comes to this borough, most government departments will go with the multiple deprivation statistics, and so the resources will go to Kilcooley, they'll go to Rathgill, and they'll go to a wee bit of town centre. So those areas would experience investment from the Department from Communities, EA, Communities in Transition, a whole range of different support, which they absolutely need. Absolutely need. There's no question about it. But based on the polarised nature of North Down, particularly Bangor, we would work in 5 main areas of need. So we have Whitehill, Conlig, Clandyboy, Breeze, Mountain, Bloomfield. And they're all areas that would experience the same type of deprivation and disadvantage. But based on where they're located and how their communities are populated, quite a bit of that need is hidden. So in the Clandyboy community, you could have, in terms of their population, people that are very, very well to do and people who are absolutely not. But in the law of averages, it all looks not too bad. So there's no resources or investment that comes in this area. The same thing would be the case for Bloomfield. So in Bloomfield Estate, which is one of the areas that was created as a result of displacement from the conflict, so that a lot of people have a connection to Belfast. They came to Bangor because they had to leave Belfast a few generations ago. So had the same issues around education underachievement, unemployment, criminality, paramilitary organisations, mental health, isolation, all those different things that take place. And if you sit in Bloomfield, which has a primary school and a nurture unit, you cannot avail of Sure Start services, for example. But if you cross over the carriageway to Whitehill, you can avail of Sure Start services. Or if you go to the other direction across the carriageway and cross over into Rathgill, you can engage in Sure Start services. So in the Belfast context, which is where I grew up, if you needed the Sure Start services, you would be able to get them. But in Bangor, you have this real polarity in terms of how resources are allocated. So when I think of the people who are overlooked and unheard, for me, it comes down to the community volunteers and the residents in those areas who do not receive government support from Department for Communities, who do not receive investment from Education Authority, who do not have any type of government initiatives coming their way to say, we recognise this community has a particular set of needs and how can we do something about that? And that's people of all generations. So we see that obviously in our young people. That's why we created our youth project, the DICE project, because there was no sustained provision in any of those areas. And yet the antisocial behaviour 12 years ago was through the roof. And the young people were brimming with potential but had no direction for it. And that's why we actually ended up ourselves with those community partners creating our youth provision, the DICE project. So we very much see those communities and the volunteers who lead those communities as people who are unheard, unseen, and often overlooked. And one of the challenges too is that they can also be quite forceful and quite vocal about that. And that just doesn't always make you popular because you're calling things out in a very robust way. I often think of when people have been wounded or harmed or hurt, if they're sort of quietly in a corner crying, they can often receive much more empathy and much more compassion than the person who is angry and the person who is upset and the person who is given off. But the pain is the same.
Yeah.
It's just the resultant manifestation of how that pain is used is different. But for me, I will always see the fact that there has been, neglect or they've been wronged in some way. And so whether they're crying in the corner and unable to respond or whether they're shouting and mad, I see the same pain.
Yeah.
And I think whenever we talk about our work with communities, for us, it's about trying to make sure that the quality of life for all of those people and those volunteers who are trying to lead those communities is enhanced as much as possible. And to date, they continue to be very much overlooked with very small piecemeals amount of money from government without the support of trusts and other funders, they would be left seriously wanting.
Yeah. And that is at the same time frustrating that's still happening. But at the same time, it just feels like that representation, that idea of representation should amplify people rather than replace them. So I think that it's an important goal to become not just like one voice, as you said, or this pocket that can access services or that other pocket that can access services, but it's the whole. And especially with those people who are not able to receive services or that they are deprived. So it's very important to become that voice. And I think you're doing great by helping these people to be able to talk about that, not just to be the voice yourself, but to encourage them to speak up and to give a space for that anger or all of those emotions.
But sometimes one of the most challenging things is that ultimately our role is to try and help raise aspiration. And I think one of the challenges for us is at times where you can see the potential in a small group of volunteers or in an individual or in a wider community, but they've been so beaten down by the system that their sense of engaging in it or believing or having even expectation that they deserve better is barely there. And that's a big part of the work, is to be sincerely saying to them, you are capable, you deserve the following, this is not good enough. And them, them really believing and saying, actually, that's right, this is not good enough. I should have higher expectations of my government departments or local investment or my political reps. But even that is a journey in itself, even to get them to the point where they're so moved that they actually stand up for themselves, and trying to even get them to stand up and understand their value and their rights in the midst of that is so important. But it's a big challenge as well.
It is very, very big challenge indeed, but I also believe that is so worthwhile because there's so many people that you are not just helping them to realize their own self, but to start thriving and to be, as you said, looking and growing their aspirations. So I think it's very, very relevant. NDCN places a strong emphasis on partnership, networking, and sharing resources and encouraging organizations to work together. But at the same time, many charities and community groups are competing for funding, as you were saying before. So how can we create a genuine collaboration in environment where organizations feels like they are protecting their own future?
I suppose for me, it comes down to that sense of there being. I think we should have funding pots that are tailored for particular types of need. Obviously, our organization wants to be sustainable, but I think that there's something about funding being able to be tailored to enable everyone to move in a direction that makes them stronger. So if we take, for example, the running cost grants or whatever, if something like that was tailored in such a way that priority was given to volunteer-led groups who don't have a set of assets in the background and aren't already invested in by government, well, they're in a position to get slightly stronger. And then if you have a different kind of tranche of funding that's for those that are maybe have one or two staff members or maybe do have some assets or are sitting in a different position to move to the next level. So for me, it's about making sure that based on the needs that you have as an organization, that the funding is actually tailored and targeted to make sure that you're able to be supported. I mean, I was looking at the government partnership with the community and voluntary sector around funding and the FAIR principles, and for me, there's something about that feeling really aspirational, really hopeful. But unless government officials are obliged to do it, like a Section 75 filter, if you don't do an equality filter on things as a government organisation, there's consequences. So I feel that those types of initiatives in terms of government departments better understanding the terrain of the community and voluntary sector is vital, that funding is also tailored, that groups continue to move into the next stage and level of where they're at until they reach a point where they've maybe created their own social enterprise. So then, in my view, if that social enterprise sustains the charity, well, you work away. At that point, I think you're in a position, as opposed to striving to do more and more and more and take more and more from the sector that's already struggling financially, I would be saying, well, surely if you're at a social enterprise level able to kind of cover most of your own costs, go for smaller amounts as opposed to taking more from the sector because you're stronger. And I think where you can bring people with you, I think is also really vital too. Because whenever we think about the spectrum of our sector, it's very hard for many elected representatives to understand when they go to a local charity tea dance or a church fete and they have the loveliest time and everyone's delightful to them. And then they come to one of our community practitioners events, which is our community-led volunteer groups who get elected representatives together on a quarterly basis for some really straight talking about needs in community and what they're doing or what they're not doing. It feels like they're going, why these people are so nice to me and why are you now being so difficult? And you're like, listen, they're not being disingenuous, but their expectation of you is different. And we're here to call you to account for the fact that there's justice in this community. So trying to get elected representatives in government departments to understand the community and voluntary sector is not one thing. It's a spectrum. And within that spectrum, there needs to be a different tailored approach to supporting those organizations at particular stages to move to the next level.
That's so powerful because, yes, Most people would just like to have everything so smooth and being welcome and but not being challenged. But I think we all need to be critical that way and say, well, okay, yeah, that what you're doing is good, but what about such and such? And I think that's very powerful. There's a project. Would you like to talk to us a bit about DICE future projects that creates safe spaces for young people? Would you like to tell us about it, please?
Sure. It came in about 2012. As I said earlier, we, along with the community groups in those areas of need, had identified that there was a massive amount of antisocial behaviour in the various areas. And all that was happening to that point was maybe around the end of January. Sometimes the police or sometimes the local policing committee safety partnership would kind of come in, parachute in for sort of 6 to 8 weeks with kind of a whole range of youth engagement programs. So they had objectives to meet, they had budgets to use, and there was a need in the community, no question. But there was no relationship development. So you had young people who thought youth work was paintballing and trips and residentials. And that's not youth work. Youth work is relationship, youth work is belief and building up and informal education and personal development and all those things. So what happened was that in these areas there was that like no activity then for 10 months of the year. And then just as the financial end of the year was coming in, then a concentrated, massively exciting range of different types of activity was happening in some of the areas. We seen that actually as being really damaging because what you had was then young people who were getting excited and enthused and engaged, and then there was nothing. And there was also no relationship development. They didn't know who the people were that were coming in to facilitate. There was no sense of investment in relationship. And we then, along with those community associations in Breesemount, Bloomfield, Whitehill, Clandyboy, and now in more recent years, Conleg, created the DICE project. It's primarily being lottery funded, and without them, we would not have been able to survive. And we basically were able to create youth clubs for young people aged 10 to 16 years of age. That has evolved over the years. So there was the DICE project, and there was DICE Connections, and we're now in a phase of the DICE Futures project, which has a high emphasis on engaging in community and citizenship, also engage in education. And we use the fingerprint learning aid smartness approach with the young people and have a cohort of young leaders who are trained in the profiling of other young people. So we're moving into a phase now where they're going to be actually facilitating other young people to understand their eight smartnesses, not just the word smart and the number smart of school, but the people smart, the music smart, the nature smart, all those different things. And we've just had a second cohort of young leaders that have came through the ranks, 9 of which have done an OCN level 1 in youth work skills. So for us, it's very much about the next generation of young people coming up and through to be able to give back. So we boast adult leaders now. We have one who's just finished her degree, who started with us when she was 12 years of age. And she's now a leader with us and she's just finished film and media production. But she volunteers on 3 of our youth clubs every week. And she was one of our young people coming through the ranks. We've a number of people who've been on that journey with us. So we very much see the need for it in terms of, again, it being sustained relationship-based youth provision. Everything we do in DICE has to be safe, fun and welcoming. So we have young people from a wide mix of backgrounds, of ethnicities, of social backgrounds, of religious backgrounds. It's a real mix of people. And at the essence of it, it's all about connection and relationship. So when the young people come through the door, they put their phones in a yellow builder's bucket at the front door. So they're not on technology in terms of their phones.
Yeah.
We've got gaming devices and all, but they're not on technology while they're actually communicating, playing games, playing darts, doing bingo, cooking, baking, whatever we think that they tell us that they would like to do is what we try to respond to, being outside in nature. And we've had a couple of litters of pups down for them to all play with for a couple of hours at youth club. So anything that we can do that is about them kind of connecting. We do some mental health support in that context too with a wee chill and chat session as well, which is about them reflecting on their mental process and their well-being and what keeps them well. So it's a really successful project and something we've got funding now until January 28th. So we have to look at our options there for sustainability going forward because it's like a big family. So every youth club has its own personality, but it is like a very big family, and you just want to continue that legacy. And you see people coming through the ranks and more coming in new, and older ones going off to do their A levels and get jobs and go on to college and whatever that might look like. So it's something that we're all very, very proud of.
Of course, and it must be very inspiring for the young ones to see, like, well, They were like me. And now look at them, they're moving away and doing something exciting. And I really love that because I love teaching special children. So when you see that process of how they grow and then make their own decisions and they turn their own personalities, and it's just so exciting to see how they are becoming
Yeah.
themselves. So it is fantastic. And I think that you as adults, often say, oh, young people are the leaders of the future. But guess what? Young people are also members of our community right now. And their experiences are current and they need the spaces and they need the activities. And the ideas are very relevant now.
Yeah.
Their perspective reveal like things that adults maybe are not longer able to see because we are focused on paying mortgages or whatever it is. So I think it's so important to have this transgenerational conversation because we are all living in the same place, the same community. So many years ago, I was involved in a community association in the local area where I was living. And I saw this real need for young people to have a space because they were too big for a play park and they didn't have any other space to go. So they would have just sat outside a park and they were misbehaving, as some people would have said. But it was all because they didn't feel that they belong anywhere. So whenever you have that space for them, and as you said, there's activities, there's a space for you that is saying that you can talk and you are encouraged to learn and you're encouraged to grow. And so I think that is really powerful. So, what happens when a young person has access to a consistent space where they feel safe and valued and known?
I think they relax enough to really be who they are. And that can also be really changeable. So, in our experience, what we have is young people who really get to shine as opposed to feeling inadequate or not good enough or I'm not the best at the sport or I'm not the best at that thing or I'm not the most number smart and school's a real struggle for me. For us, it's always about really celebrating the really wonderful assets that we see in them and trying to support them to embrace those assets and to start really believing in themselves as opposed to thinking, I'm not good enough. About right now in this moment, I am enough. I'm
Yes.
valuable. I've got something to give to this world. And the world has lots to give to me too. And I think whenever you create a sense of really seeing young people, that's what starts to happen.
I love that. And I think that the consistency, after all, becomes transformative because having that space to tend to feel safe, to feel valued, to feel that they can be themselves, that is allowing them to become themselves just because it's stable, just to have that space for a while. As you said, like activities may just excite them for a moment. And it depend on those activities to get this hype. But when you are building relationships, it's so much different because that, as you said, when you have young leaders, they are helping the younger ones and they are building these relationships that are going to last for years and years to come. So I really love the way that these young people are listening. You matter. We expect you to be here. We believe in your potential. You are an important person in this group. So I think that is so powerful for them and for the community and for the younger kids that eventually will be the young people.
I remember reading in Michelle Obama's book about her describing the importance of her mother being glad to see her
Yeah.
came home from school. And I know that for us, it really means a lot to our young people when they come through the door and they maybe haven't been in a few weeks and you're able to say, I've missed you. Hi, Ed. What's been happening? How is that? Or even last weekend, I was in a local supermarket and seeing one of the young people who used to come to club maybe 2 or 3 years ago, who's tall now and he's just starting college. And so I was like, oh my goodness, how are you? And hearing all about him. So even though he's no longer with us, I know that his experience of us at a time in his life when he needed us was really positive and he knew that we valued who he was. We seen him through some difficult times and watched him face some big struggles and challenges and overcome them. And for me, there's a big part of that when you really miss young people and show them that you miss them, or someone comes through the door and you show them that you're really glad that they're there. And I think that means a lot because not everyone is going home and feeling that someone's glad to see them.
Absolutely. And we all human beings like to be acknowledged and we all like to be liked, of course. But especially young people, I think that they have a specific need for reassurance and for acknowledgement and for acceptance that we as grown-ups we often don't give them. We usually think of them as, oh, you don't know anything just because you're too young or whatever, and that will reflect in the end, you don't know anything, you're too old and you don't understand me, and that transgenerational lack of trust and lack of communication and acceptance, I think it's very difficult, and it is causing a lot of problems in terms of how we connect with other people. So the fact that in some areas at least we are able to inspire young people to be who they are, that is okay, that they can give themselves the permission to be who they are. It's so powerful. And I would like to ask you another question. How do you sustain a team to protect the quality of the work when the demand might be greater than the organization's capacity? A little bit of what we were saying before, but I think that nowadays, with the technology, I think there might be a lot of need of people to have these spaces. So how can you facilitate that?
No, I think there was a point that you reach where you kind of say, we can't do any more than that. I think if we're trying to support people in the context of community or trying to support the volunteers in the community without them reaching a point of burnout, I think I have a responsibility on our staff to say that is enough.
Yeah.
For example, we're having a short break. Our programs run basically 46 weeks every year. So we have a 2 weeks off at July, 2 weeks off at Christmas, and then a week at Easter, and the odd wheelie stay here and there. But we're in a position where for a period of July, some of our activities will wind down because our facilitators and tutors are saying, I'm going on holiday. So you're like, well, I can't facilitate a yoga class or I can't facilitate a singing group. And it's funny because you've got some people that are coming back and they're saying, oh, what are we going to do? Like, what are we supposed to do? And initially you have this feeling of sort of going, oh, what can we do? What can we do for you? And then we were like, you can just get together. You can just get together as adults in a local coffee shop or go for a walk in the park or have a picnic in the park or do whatever. Because for me, it's about each member of our team also operates in a different way. They have a different need. So it's about me, again, having a good relationship with each of our staff teams so that I know what it is they need to make sure that it doesn't reach breaking point for them. Because the pressure is there, no question. I would be a believer that if you're not very busy and work with your head down, that you're not working hard enough.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so they are definitely facing pressure. But for me, it's always about just trying to get that balance that it's motivating enough without being overwhelming. And I think that comes from my relationship with each of them and how that type of support is quite tailored. Some will require quite a bit of hands on support, and others will be like, just let me go until I need you. And then when I need you, I'll shout. And it's about being sort of flexible that way in terms of helping sustain them. But for me, that's very much about us walking the talk. If we're telling people about the importance of making sure that they keep well and well-being, then we have to be walking that talk. We can't just be saying it and not doing it ourselves.
Absolutely. I think like we all have experienced that guilt, even with our own families. Like, I mean, I know you want to do this, but maybe I can't. And we feel guilty for not being able to do it. But at the same time, as you say, it's very important to realize, you know what, I don't have the capacity right now to do that. And, protecting your staff and your volunteers. And it's very, very important as well. And I think sometimes we need to learn from that a bit more. Mm.
Wouldn't be the first time that I said to the staff team, oh, what about this? We're doing an event, and why don't we do this? Which makes it so much more work. And they would go to me, no, no, we don't need a balloon arch for this celebration event. That's another hour of time that we don't have. And I'm all like, okay, okay. So it's also taking the feedback when other people you respect are saying to you, like, no, that's too much. So definitely in listening to having to take the lead from them at times as well.
Absolutely. And it's very understandable there. So what about the monies? So the funders need evidence and their organizations are recording the attendance and the referrals and the participation, and the funding might be secure based on the number of participants in programs. But sometimes that's not what we need to measure. So sometimes the most valuable change is the confidence, is the feeling of belonging, the dignity, the trust, and the hope. And those, while are more important, they're really difficult to measure. So when we think about capturing that information, so how can you prove that a program was successful based on the results of the program without reducing that into a number and say, well, we had 20 people, but maybe one person has received more of this program than others.
We do the admin that we have to. And then what we do is we share the deeper impact of the people that we would support in terms of sort of case studies. Um, and even for us, it may not even be something that we actually sit down and write, but for us, there will always be a person if you're thinking, right, so like we're going into a new phase of looking at social media and short films that will be people, you're taking this person who started with us at a particular place and is now in a completely different location in terms of their life and what they do and how active they are and how healthy they are and how hopeful they are about the future. So we would find a way of capturing that, even if it's like a video or it's a written case study. I suppose part of it is even around how we maintain the relationships with it. But for us, there's a recognition that with some funders are really interested in those case studies and they'll ask for them and they'll want them. They'll really genuinely want to see them and they'll really believe and they'll be wanting to meet the people that you're talking to and they'll come out and they'll meet them. And that's the funder that you know really cares about impact. And then you'll have another funder or government department who's only interested in the statistics. And I think they and we have just came to the understanding that you just want to know these stats and that's just exactly what we're going to give you. Because for me, it's a wee bit like about if you had a child whose teacher was only interested in their numeracy and you knew that they were a fantastic musician and gymnast, that mathematician teacher is no more interested in their gymnastic ability or their musical talent. So I just won't waste my energy to try and convince them of the other layers of value of this person if the only thing they're interested in is their numeracy. I'll just say, here's their numeracy scores, genuinely done, but you're missing so much more of what this is. I know that there's obviously a move, there has been in recent years around the outcomes-based accountability stuff. Even that, which obviously had the aspiration to kind of humanize the impact, now for so many people just feels like another statistical journey they have to go on because it's sort of shoehorned into projects now as opposed to being a really natural way of showcasing the value. So we just work with it because we recognise when it comes to government departments, some funders, but not all, there's only a certain layer or depth that they're interested in, and we achieve that and we give that to them. And then for those funders and for ourselves, then we'll tell a much deeper story that's much more human and much richer, I suppose, in terms of the impact it's really made. And that's the thing that keeps us motivated, not the numbers.
Absolutely, because when you think about it, numbers just tell you the scale of the activity. But even if you only hear the story of one person that reveals that attending that particular event made them feel home or that they spoken openly or that they were struggling and as a result of that they feel part of it. I don't know, that's so empowering and that's something that you can show to the people who come after more than the funders. It's just so I found it very, very relevant. Well, you know that this podcast is called the Conversations with Agents of Change. So when you hear the phrase agents of change, what does it mean to you?
At first, I thought like it sounds like a James Bond thing. This sounds like a new 007. I suppose for me, it's about people who believe that part of what we're doing right now is not working well, and that there is both the hope and the potential for change. And it's a worthy cause to put your shoulder to something like whatever it is you're interested in or whatever it is lights you up or whatever your particular passion lies, because you really do have a feeling and a sense that the world could and should be better and that you and others around you need to be part of creating the changes needed. So for me, it's a real message of hope.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with you there because we can see change through learning something new or introducing something new to your life. But at the same time, when you connect with something that already exists, when you're strengthening the bonds with people who are already trying and making invisible voices more visible and building structures and that all that good work survives. I think that is really, really important. And to me, that's part of that hope and an idea that working together, we get further. I think that what you're doing at North Down Community Networks delivers directly, but through people more than the facilitation of events or the activities, but it's like directly from people, from the recipients of the programs, but also from the volunteers and the organization that is enabling. So I'm very encouraged and I'm very inspired by your work. So is there anyone who has been an agent of change in your own life?
Oh, wow. I think they'll make it really personal. I think my mother, my mum was involved in community development work actually before she retired. But what I have witnessed my whole life has been a woman who is imperfect, hardworking, and who has been committed to learning her whole life. So I love that she's 70 years of age now. She'll kill me for sharing her age. But I love that my mum is so keen to continue to grow and learn and develop and to do more and to do better. And I find her a real inspiration.
That's so beautiful because it's a very meaningful reminder that our influence often travels further than we realize. Because I think that in this case, it's your mom, but I can only see that her impact or her work has touched so many people and has inspired so many other people. So I really like that. So,
And she volunteers with us now.
oh, there you go.
She's not allowed to set the community development world down entirely. She's a volunteer with us too. So
Oh, that's brilliant. So there you go. You have a great volunteer there that is helping. So, Luis, thank you so much for joining me. Our conversation today has been really inspiring.
no, thank you so much for the invitation. And it's been really encouraging for me too, Izzy. I really appreciate the feedback and your support and encouragement.
Absolutely. And I just think that, especially when it comes to young people, it's very much needed. Sometimes I feel that is a group age that is overlooked in so many ways. So I am very particularly interested in what you're doing. And I wanted to say that it's been built by the volunteers, but they are given by the confidence and the knowledge to lead responsibly. So I think it's fantastic what your organs are doing. Northdown Community Network describes itself as a focal point for the community and voluntary sector, but its deeper role is to help create the conditions in which communities can organize, connect, and flourish. So, Louise, your leadership is illustrating something at the heart of this podcast, that an agent of change does not always need to be the loudest person in the room. Sometimes an agent of change is the person who makes room for others, the person who strengthens the foundations, connect the right people, and quietly ask, what do we need in order to make this possible? So, thank you for all the work you're doing and for sharing your experience with us today. If you've been listening to this episode and you want to learn more about Louise and the work of Northdown Community Network, visit the NDCN website and follow their community programs and updates. And perhaps after listening today, you might ask yourself, where could I help someone to feel heard? What knowledge, relationship, or resource could I share? And how could I help the people around me become confident in creating change for themselves? Because change does not belong only to institutions or recognized leaders. I'm Michelle Boyd. Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep being an agent of change. This podcast is produced by the Change Impact Group.